So the way I usually explain it is to imagine everyone who works in different industries. They have different careers, every possible career. They have something in common. And that's the fact that they use spreadsheets. They use something like Excel. Okay. Now imagine that one day we get Excel from them and instead we give them something, a programming language, Python or something else. And when you think about it, a programming language is a lot more powerful than Excel. Anything you can do with Excel, you can do with a programming language. And there are lots of things you can do with a programming language that is very difficult, at least, if not impossible, to do with Excel. So that makes it a good idea, doesn't it? Maybe not, because in reality, if you do something like that, most of these people won't be able to use that. Only a few people, those on the bottom, they can use the programming language, but the rest of the people will remain without the tool. They have to use calculators or pen and paper. And that would be a problem. Now, imagine what happens in the project management world. We have lots of great standards, methods, resources, but in reality, only a few people can really use them. And the majority of people who are involved in projects are remained without a tool because using those things turn out to be too difficult for most people. They're like asking people to use a programming language like instead of Excel. And what we miss here is really something like Excel for project managers, for the majority of project managers. And that's why P3express was created. It was not created to be a competition for PRINCE2 or the PMBOK guide or DSCM or something else. The idea was that the real audience for P3express is the typical project manager. The project managers that you know around you and probably even yourself. But it seems like the real audience for these other systems that I usually call them fundamental standards, the real audience seems to be more like project management process experts. Not people who actually work as project managers, but people who spend most of their time learning different systems and then helping a few organizations implement them. And that's the problem, because we are not connecting directly to the project managers, because what we have is sometimes too idealistic, too perfectionist, too complicated, and not practical for them. The tradition is to just blame the project managers for not being able to use them or blaming the executives for not supporting them. But the reality is that when it happens again and again, it's really fair to stop and ask ourselves whether what we are providing them with is what they really need. So P3express is one option that exists right now. But what I really hope for is a future where we have more options like P3express, because it's important to have options. They create a better community. It gives more choices to people, and it helps all the other options to progress. And I think there is a microphone that is on, competing with me right now. If you don't mind turning it off, I would appreciate it. So for these systems that want to be in that part here, serving the typical project managers, there are a few characteristics that seem to be necessary. One of them is minimalism. Minimalism is trying to solve the problem with the least number of elements. That makes the whole system simpler. In order to do that, we shouldn't be perfectionist. We have the 80-20 rule in mind. We don't target the 100% of the potential benefits of a structured project management system. We try to gain 80% of that with 20% of the elements and 20% of the effort. That's the idea. And the reason behind it is that when it becomes bigger to cover all possibilities, it becomes too complicated to be used. The other element that we really need to have for anything in that position is that we should not try to start from scratch. That would be horrible. And I'm saying that because it's been done a lot. People are starting from scratch without using the experiences and knowledge that was created before. It is really important because all of these things, PRINCE2, the PMBOK guide, DSTM, XP, they are really great. They are really, really great, and a lot of work has been done for them. And anything that will be created in the future must benefit from them. Although there's a difficulty here. There's a difference between mixing things and synthesizing. Mixing doesn't add value. You can easily go and pick a few things from PRINCE2, pick a few things from the PMBOK guide, or a few other places, put them together, create a new package, put a name on it, but that doesn't solve any problem. But what you can do is be inspired by what was done there and learn from what exists in those systems and let a new thing synthesize. And that's what was done in P3express. The other thing is that it's a lot more effective when our systems are outcome-oriented instead of output-oriented. And for example, in the PMBOK guide, in the 7th edition, one of our goals was to turn it from something that was output-oriented into something that is outcome-oriented. Output-oriented is something that tells you need to have, for example, a document like this. An outcome-oriented one is one that tells you the results that you need to have and lets you find out the document yourself or gives you a few hints about those documents. The output-oriented system has the typical problems that you're probably familiar with. People think that as long as they have those outputs, they have a proper project management system. They create a list of every document described in the PMBOK guide or in PRINCE2. They somehow create them, usually based on templates, and then they expect it to work very well. And it doesn't, because there's nothing behind it. That's actually the cargo cult effect. I'm going to write it down here in case you want to look it up later. Cargo cult effect. That's a very interesting concept. You will see how it applies to project management when you read about the concept. So the last one is that these new systems, like P3express, need to address our modern concerns. We have a social responsibility as project managers because we work with many different people. And these have to be a built-in part of our systems, not bolted into them, not separate, but part of it. For example, the project management manager is considered responsible for the growth of people who work in the project. That's a type of ethical and social responsibility. And other things that you may expect, being against discrimination, for example. And we've actually done a lot about it, and the result was really interesting. There's this e-learning course for P3express that is free. I will give you the URL at the end. It's an interactive fiction where there's a story and you play the role of the first character in the story. You will interact with people, make decisions, and based on the decisions you make, you will go through different paths in the story. And you get feedback from your environment, and that's how you learn. Now, when you think about it, like every other story, we have lots of characters there, and those characters need to have names. We spent a lot of time working on those names. We didn't want to have, I don't know, the typical English names or names that are usually male and maybe a few female names there. We want it to be something that really belongs to everyone. So we investigated and created a list of 20 names coming from 20 different nations, and all of them, with no exception, are unisex names. Now, for some people, these things may not seem too important, but one of the consequences was that we have a lot of contributors from everywhere in the world. A really diverse group of people that usually doesn't happen, because I've been involved in many projects like this, and it's the first time that I see such a diverse group of people helping, and that's great. I think it has something to do with those concerns. But anyway, going forward with our new systems, I think that should always be part of it, the social aspects. Okay, so that was the first part. If you have any questions, we can talk about it, and then I will go to the second part.
There were no questions in the chat, actually, so maybe we can continue. Questions will come and will arrive, definitely, when you talk about it, how it works and what it is.
Actually, the chat is open here. I saw your question. You're probably waiting for people to answer you who's been a contributor in this room. At least I can think of Angel. He has helped.
Okay.
But I didn't check the list of all participants. There may be more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Continue.
So there is one more fundamental problem. The problem that if we want to reinvent the wheel as project managers, it will be very difficult for us. It's a really expensive and risky process to create our own system. It's always like that. And that's why we have many different project management methodologies, guides, and so on. And it's a really good idea to use them. And it's not even limited to project management, because what happens inside your project management layer, here in the third layer in this model, really depends on other layers of management. There is your organizational management, which is in parallel to what we have here. That's not our topic. But we also have portfolio management, the fifth level here. That's where you select projects and resource projects. There's program management that's focused on results that will be created with multiple projects usually. The technical management is parts that really depend on the technical aspect of your project. For example, how do you test your project? Test the deliverables. If it's an IT development project, you will be thinking about different testing aspects there. You also have other concerns, for example, which programming paradigm you want to use, which programming language or framework you want to use, that type of thing. Those are technical management. And we have it in all projects, but they are really different. They depend on the type of project. When you go to a construction project, you're suddenly thinking about how to cure the concrete and how to test the concrete and what to do with the steel structure and so on. And finally, on the lowest level, we have personal task management for people who work inside the project. Having this in mind is really important, because sometimes we have problems that have roots in a layer other than project management. And it happens a lot that people try to solve it in their project management layer, and that never works well. And that's usually, in fact, one of the main reasons people create complicated project management systems. So, for example, I was once invited to go and help a company, as they put it, improve their project management system. I worked with them a little bit to understand how they work, and I saw that they have about 50 developers, and those 50 developers work on, I don't remember exactly, but I think 80 or 90 projects at the same time. Now, when you imagine it, that's obvious. They will always have problems. It doesn't matter how they manage their project. They will always have problems because they should not work on so many projects at the same time. And that is a portfolio management problem. That's the right place to solve it, not in the project management system. So that's one thing to consider. That's really key here. And when you want to start implementing these things, create a proper ecosystem in your company, there are many resources that can help you. And I have some of them here. Not everything on Earth is included. So there are systems that are not here. They may be still important, but this is what we have here for our conversation. You probably know PRINCE2. It's a really well-structured project management methodology, really interesting. And from the same resource, we also have systems for program management and portfolio management. There's also the PMBOK guide. I've separated PMBOK 6 and PMBOK 7 for explaining a certain point, but I won't go through that part here. But anyway, PMBOK is a really famous resource. You've probably heard of it. And from the same organization, PMI, we also have resources about program and portfolio management system. There's PMBOK from the UK with other resources. There's PM Squared from the EC, and they also have other resources for program and portfolio management. NUPP, NUPP is Nearly Universal Principles of Projects. It's a cousin of P3express, but it's not a method. It's only a number of principles that help you interpret your system better. And it can be used with anything, not only P3express, but also PRINCE2 or something else. Then there's P3express, which is for managing projects. And actually, right now, we are working on P5express, which is for portfolio management. So P5express would be minimalist portfolio management. And after that, we will start working on P4express. P2 and P1express, the concepts exist somehow in an abstract world, but I don't know if we can ever cover them. I don't know. We don't have any plans for it. And by the way, P3express is designed for small, medium, and large projects, but not mega projects and not micro projects. For those, you cannot use P3express directly. You need to customize it a lot. Recently, we've had micro P3express, which is a system inspired by P3express and designed for micro projects, projects with 1 to 5 people. Micro P3express is really new and it's still open for review. It will be open until the end of February. So if you're interested, you can check it and send comments. It will be very appreciated. Other things we have here, ICB, a really interesting resource that has a different perspective. It's about the competencies you need to have as a project manager or program management or portfolio manager. It's a really good list. So for your even personal developments, you can check ICB, see all the different things that you need to have, see what your weakest point is, and then plan for improving that. When you do, then you can come back to ICB and see what the next weakest point is, and so on. And here we have different things. XP, Extreme Programming, it's one of the first generation Agile systems. It used to be the most famous one. Really interesting. Crystal, another first generation Agile method with really smart ideas behind it. And there was room for a lot of development, but it never happened. I mean, further development of the method. DSDM, it's also first generation Agile, and it's different from the rest because as you see here, XP, for example, was almost entirely in the technical layer, but DSDM covered the whole project management layer in addition to a little bit of the technical layer. Not as much as XP, but the main thing with DSDM was that it covered the whole project management system. There are also a few really interesting ideas in DSDM. So if you have agile projects, I think DSDM, XP, they are really, really helpful. You don't have to use them, but you can read them and be inspired by them. Then we have the Scrum, which everyone knows about. It covers a little bit of project management and some of the technical management. And it also has a little bit of program management. But that's my interpretation of it. It doesn't mention program management, but what exists in a Scrum, some parts of it has program management nature. And the other things you see here are not first generation anymore. There are things that are created, inspired by Scrum, and they've inherited this nature of covering a little bit of program management. They're usually used for bigger teams, projects with more than one small team, in other words. And here in personal task management, there's personal Kanban and GTD, getting things done, as two examples that came to my mind. Now, these are the things that you have and you can use them to your advantage. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. They are all interesting. They are really helpful. Now, when you want to select and start going on with these things, there are a few things that you need to have in mind. The first thing, in my opinion, is that some of these are methods and some of them are guides. This distinction is important. A method is one that gives you a path throughout your project or whatever else the subject is. But a guide is only a guide. It points out a few important things for you. PRINCE2, for example, is a method, but the PMBOK guide has never been a method. Many people try to use the PMBOK guide as a method, and they talk about implementing the PMBOK guide, but that's not the purpose. That was never the goal when they created the PMBOK guide, and it was always explained in the PMBOK guide itself that this is not a method. You need to have a method and then use this. The way it works normally is that you start with a method because that's the one that shows you the way. You implement it, start using it, and after a while, when you want to improve your method, you get help from some of these guides. That's why we have the guides. So something like the PMBOK guide is there to help you enrich one of the methods that you've implemented before, not to be used by itself. So that's the first thing to consider. The other one is that some of these are general and you can use them in any type of project, but some of them are domain specific. The things that are domain specific are normally those that have something in the technical layer, because that's the nature of the technical layer. You cannot be there without becoming domain specific. Maybe we can imagine something like that, but it becomes very difficult to have a technical management system which is not domain specific. The other property is that some of these are minimalist and some of them are maximalist. As I said before, minimalist is one that tries to solve the problems with the least number of elements. And when we see a new problem in a minimalist approach, what we do is that we try to solve it by adjusting the existing things. Or even before that, we have to decide whether or not we want to solve it inside the system, because there are sometimes problems, but they are best left to the ad hoc decisions of project managers. Not every problem has to be solved inside the structured system. That's the approach for minimalist systems, but in maximalist systems, whenever we see a new problem, we add we normally add something new to our system to solve that. And if you imagine the PMBOK guide, for example, from version 1 to version 6, it was growing each and every time. That's because that's the approach in problem solving in a maximalist system. Those extra pages, those were things that were helping you solve more problems, problems that were made obvious when we solved other things in the past. Now, in general, minimalist systems are simpler, easier to understand and to use, but that's not a general thing. What we can say more comfortably is that for a methodology, it's easier to have a minimalist system. But when it comes to a guide, I think it's natural to expect a maximalist system. That's a really good match for a guide. The next property is that some of these are proprietary and some of them are non-proprietary. A proprietary one is one that is restricted by copyright. And what you can do with them is limited in different ways. Now, for practitioners, it's not as critical as it is for trainers and consultants. Because for a trainer or consultant, you're investing a lot of your time creating a product or a service, and you expect it to work for you for many years. But in the case of any of the proprietary systems, they can change their mind any day and come back to you and say, from now on, you're not allowed to give services about my topic anymore, or you're not allowed to give training courses anymore. Or if you want to do, you have to pay this amount of money, which is a lot of money. That's a problem, that's a big risk. But with non-proprietary elements like P3express, PMBOK, Scrum, XP, you don't have that problem. The rights are given out to the practitioners, to the users, and usually if there's a well-formed license, those rights cannot be revoked. P3express, for example, uses Creative Commons. It's a license. And in that license, everything like this is covered. So for example, the right to use it is something that is given to the user and it can never be taken back from the user. What it means is that the consultants who are creating their services or trainers who are creating courses, when they do it, they know that they can always use it. No one will stop them. So that was a quick overview. And before I end it, I want to go back to the first topic of why there was something like P3express, and then we can go through the questions if we have any. Take a look at these things. We can filter them out for project management systems. Not because the rest of them are not important. They are really important. That was one of my points. But I'm filtering them because our topic is project management. That's the only reason. Now we also filter it for things that are methods. You may prefer to call them frameworks or methods or methodologies. It's not important. And we want to filter it because that's the first step. We have to have a method before we go for a guide. And then it may be a good idea to also filter for minimalist ones because based on experience, implementation of something that is not minimalist, we don't have really good experiences with that. We don't have a lot of success stories. So we are left with these elements. And we have one more filter. If you want to have something that is general, you can use for every type of project. Or you want to have something that covers the whole project management layer, this is the only option left. And actually, there was a gap here, and that was the reason P3express was created. This is P3express, which is what I'm going to tell you about in the next section after answering questions. So Patrick, do we have any questions?
Bruce actually had the same question as I had when you mentioned P3express and P3express. What were the driving factors to focus on portfolio management? So P3express first, after P3express, rather than developing out P3express first? I mean,
well, all of these are really modular. So let me go back here. So you can, for example, use P3express for portfolio management and, I don't know, MSP for program management and PRINCE2 for project management. That's okay. And the same independence exists between the three of them here. So we are not limited to going in order P3express and then P3express and then P3express. And given that, why we went for P3express first is that we all believe that that's the highest priority.
okay.
Many companies have problems in portfolio management systems. And in project management systems, in the project management layer, we actually have more options to choose from. We don't even have that many for portfolio management.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so how far away are these P3express and P3express things?
I think the first draft of P3express will be published in about 2 months, if I'm not too optimist or too pessimist. And after that, we will start working on P3express, which probably takes about 6 to 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said before, it's also important. The current project is the main current project is micro P3express, and that's what we published in December, I think, and it's open for public review until the end of February.
Okay. Yeah. Public review means you can go to the website, you can read all about it. It's all freely available.
Yes, and submit comments. And when people submit comments, they can also mention whether or not they want to be credited as contributors in the future. The whole family here is really also privacy friendly. So, for example, when you go to the P3express website and want to download the manual,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't ask you to enter your email address or something. There's a link, you click on the link and it downloads just like that. Or even when you take the course, it doesn't ask you to open a user account. It just asks you if it's okay to create a cookie to save your progress. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
No information is exchanged there.
Well, that's a relief. Okay, thank you. I think Frederick mentioned the micro P3express website in the chat, and Dragan also mentioned on progress for P5 and P4. So they're also in the room, so they can answer further questions. You can chat with them. You can also use the interpersonal chat if you want, the private chat, to ask them questions and follow up with other people in a Zoom room. So I think that concludes the questions for Module 2. Let's dive into P3express now.
Okay. So this is the P3express process. And here, as you see, we have different sections. There's the project initiation section. That's where we create a foundation for the project. And at the end of this part, that's when we decide whether or not we want to run the project. And if you have an external customer, at the end of this section, you decide to sign the contract with them. Then after that, we run the project in monthly cycles. This big cycle is a month. Oh, okay. My slides have a different order. So forget about the cycles. I told you about project initiation. And at the end, we also have project closure. That's where we tie up the loose ends and prepare everything to close the project. And then we go and talk about the cycle. So each cycle, each monthly cycle has a number of initiation activities here. That's the monthly initiation. And the idea is that we don't plan everything in detail upfront. We have a high-level plan upfront, and then we add details and refine it in the monthly initiation activities. Similar to the manage by stages concept in PRINCE2, or a little bit like the rolling wave planning in the PMBOK guide. At the end of each month, we have a few monthly closure activities. And again, similar to the project, here we close the loose ends and go on to the next cycle. Then inside each monthly cycle, we have a weekly cycle, and these are the activities. And we also have a few daily activities. So this is the main part. And here at the end, we have a special cycle here. This is the post-project management cycle. It's what we do after the project. So it's basically outside the boundaries of the project. That's important. And if you want to be really precise, it does not belong to a project management system. It belongs to the program and portfolio management system. But P3express has accepted the reality that most companies don't have those management layers. And because of that, it's added these few post-project activities here, just in case, to make sure that people won't forget about these. These are the source. Forgetting these is the source of a lot of problems in many companies. But if you have program and portfolio management systems, then these will go and merge into those layers. Now we can go through each and every activity. I will give you a short description, and then at the end, we'll go through the questions. So we start everything by appointing a sponsor. The sponsor is someone who's responsible for the high-level decisions and for bringing resources and money to the project. That's the first thing we do. And for example, if you've become the project manager in the middle of the work, you still go and check everything from the beginning. You check to see, do we have a sponsor? And if the answer is no, the first thing you have to do is to go and talk to people and try to have someone appointed as the sponsor. You don't appoint a sponsor, but you talk to people who do that. Make sure that it has happened. After that, the sponsor appoints the project manager. And then the project manager gets help from the sponsor to appoint the key team members. So you see here, this is a little bit special. The project is not approved yet. And in the case of projects with external customers, we don't have the contract yet. We are just going to create a foundation. We are going to think about the project and decide whether or not it's a good idea to run it. But we want the key team members to be officially appointed here. The very same people who will be working in the project later on. P3express is extremely against the idea of having a separate team for working on contracts. If you need to have contractor specialists, you just bring them to the team, but let them, the key team members who will be responsible for the project to work here. That helps have more realistic estimates, realistic contracts in the project. So now that we have the people, we start describing the project. We want to create a common understanding of the project. Why are we doing the project? What is the justification of the project? And we have to also go a little bit into detail, maybe not detail, but relatively. For example, what are the main requirements in this project? Who are the people who will impact the project, the stakeholders? And after exploring all those questions, we will write them down in a document, a really simple text document that is called project description. This one here. Throughout the project later on, we will update this document, especially in B1. It's not a fixed document. After that, we identify and plan the deliverables. So the first thing we do is that we will have workshops to break down the product of the project. And we create something we've called the Deliverables Map. It's a map of the deliverables. And the recommendation is to use a mind map because that helps you avoid some of the common mistakes. And for those people who are familiar with project management terms, it's exactly like what a well-formed work breakdown structure is, or a product breakdown structure in PRINCE2 terminology. The reason we didn't want to use the common term work breakdown structure is that it has caused a lot of misunderstanding throughout the history of project management. After all, it's called work breakdown structure, so people expect it to be about work. But then we have to explain, no, when we say work in work breakdown structure, we mean deliverables. So we wanted to avoid the problem. We just called it deliverables map, just as easy as that. So you create the deliverables map, and then we have two possibilities here, depending on the product of the project. For projects that have a lot of dependencies, they will go for a dependency-based schedule. That's where you create activities, you estimate their duration, you create their relationships, and probably use CPM, critical path method. And your output will probably be presented as a Gantt chart. So that will be done at the end of this activity. But on the other side of the spectrum, we have projects that do not have too many dependencies. Or you can decompose them in a way that they don't have too many dependencies. And in that case, instead of the dependency-based schedule that we talked about, you can go for a priority-based schedule. That's where you have a list of items, and then based on some type of criteria, you will prioritize and order them. Something like a Kanban board. So you will go for one of these two, but in some cases, you also have the option to have a dependency-based approach for the higher levels of your project, and for the lower levels, for those details, you can go for a priority-based system. That is also absolutely fine if you have the proper tools to do that. But anyway, that's it for identifying and planning the deliverables. And as I told you before, we really don't want to make it too detailed here. When possible, we prefer to have a high-level plan in project initiation and then detail it 1 month at a time in monthly initiation. That makes it easier to plan, and the plans become more realistic. It has lots of good things. So the next step, we identify risks and plan responses to those risks. And for that, we have a special document called Followup Register. It's a register for risks, issues, change requests, improvement plans, for all of them in one place. And we don't even distinguish them. We put them there, we create responses for them, and we follow up on them. Some people who are familiar with project management, they are shocked when they see that we have only one register instead of 4 or 5. But there are multiple reasons here. First, in a simple system, you can use the same process more or less for all of those. And when that's possible, it's a good idea to merge them into one. It becomes easier. And second, these items, think of a risk. A risk is something that can happen in the future, may happen in the future. And if it does, it will have an impact on your project. Now, you submit it, you record that thing, which is a risk at that time. You go on with your project, and 2 months later, it really happens. The very same thing really happens. Now it has turned from a risk to an issue. You work with it, you go on, and finally you close it. And when you think about it, when you close it with all the information that you've registered for it, it is really a lesson learned for you. So basically, these different types, the very same item morphs from one type into the other. And that's why it can make sense to have all of them in one register. And the name is Followup Register to remind us always that the most important thing we have to do is to follow up on those things, because it's very common for projects to have fantastic risk registers. They do everything, but they just keep it there. They don't do anything with it. It's all there for us to follow up on until they are closed. Okay, the next one is peer review. We have this concept of peer review in P3express, and we've received a lot of good feedback from people. They were very happy about using peer reviews. It's where you go and find another project manager in your company. And if you cannot find such a person, if there's no confidentiality problems, you will go and bring someone from somewhere else. Then you sit together, you will have a conversation, you take a look at what you've done during that activity group, double check everything, and go on with your work. That's peer review. Now, it has two main advantages. The first one is that you're too close to the work. And because of that, sometimes you may miss some of the mistakes. But when you bring a fresh set of eyes, they may discover some of those problems. That's a great help. And the second thing is that both of you are learning from each other. So when you do that in the organization, gradually the whole organization is growing, all the project managers together. And the concept is that each time we prefer to bring a new person as the peer reviewer to improve both of those points that I mentioned before. So you do the peer review, you make adjustments if needed, and then is the go, no-go decision. You give all the information to the project sponsor and wait for them to come back with the answer. Should we go on with the project or should we just stop here? And this is also important here. We want the sponsor to be the contact point with the other management layers for the project. So we don't want the project manager to go and talk to 10 different people in the organization, or even realize who should have a say on this. They only talk to the sponsor, and it's the responsibility of the sponsor to know what happens in the company. So, assuming that the answer is to go on with the project, we will have a kickoff, which is first focused on team building, making it easier for people to work together, and then based on distributing information about the project. And then we have a focused communication. And as you see here, we have focused communications at the end of each activity group. In each focused communication, we send a message to a certain audience and tell them something. In here, we send a message to everyone in the company and tell them that we are going to start this project. The idea is that it's important for people who are working in a company to know what's going on, what types of project we have. They need to also understand why we are doing those projects. We don't want people to be only focused on a specialist activities. We want them to have a sense of projects and align themselves with the goals of the project. So that was project initiation. That's what we do at the beginning before starting to execute the project. We create the foundation, we check with people who have to check it and see if it's a good idea to run the project. And if so, we go on with our monthly cycles. The first thing we do each month is to revise and refine the plans. There are two aspects here. The first one is that normally we don't want to have a detailed upfront plan. We want to have a high-level upfront plan. And each month at the beginning, we will add details for the upcoming months because that's more realistic. That's easier to do. In addition to that, we also check and improve the high-level plan for the whole project. Then we have another peer review. And I forgot to mention in the previous peer review activity, the results of the peer review activity goes to the fourth and last document we have here called Health Register. So these four here are all the documents we have in P3express. It doesn't mean that you won't have any other documents, but those won't be a structured, formal part of your project management system in P3express. After the peer review and possible adjustments, we will have another go, no-go decision. Again, you send the information to your sponsor and wait for them to go and talk to people and tell you whether or not it's a good idea to go on with the project. Now, usually most organizations do not stop the projects in the middle, even though sometimes they really have to. So first, we want to create the culture to be conscious about the justification of the project. As you see here, by the way, we don't have a business case. In P3express, business case is outside the boundaries of the project. It's something that has to be created in the program or portfolio management layer. And in the project layer, we only ask them for a copy of the business case right in the beginning and create a summary of some of the important things in our project description. So here, again, when we think about the go, no-go decisions, inside the boundaries of the project, we don't make all the decisions because there are lots of things we have to know about. When it's about justification, we have to compare it with every other project. Sometimes the project may be justifiable, but not the best thing you can do at the moment. Maybe there's something else you can do instead of this, which is 10 times more justifiable. And that's something you can only understand with a really high-level perspective to the whole organization in the portfolio level. You need to know all the projects, all the programs, all operations, and depending on the organization, even sometimes the politics of the country and other things. So anyway, here we do what we can and give the information to the sponsor, and the sponsor goes and takes care of those things and comes back to us and tells us what happens. Besides that, we also want to have this pause here, waiting, really waiting for the sponsor to come back and tell us about it, because that becomes a continuous reminder for everyone that we are doing the project for a reason. And if we cannot satisfy that reason, there's no reason for us to go on with it. So that reminds people to understand what that reason is and align their activities with that. Okay, so again, if it's okay to continue the project, the next activity is to have another kickoff meeting. We still call it kickoff. It's a maybe fractal-like. The small cycles look like the big project and so on. Here again, we get together with a smaller group. We have something that works as team building. The team building aspect is very important for us. And we also have some communication, some information will be exchanged. And at the end, as usual, we have focused communication. You send a message to everyone who's related to this part and tell them what we are going to do in the upcoming months. What do we want to get out of the project? What are the achievements we expect from the project in this month? Okay, that was the monthly initiation group. And then we have the weekly cycle. The first thing we do every week is to measure and report performance. For measuring, our focus is on forecasting the completion dates, the amount of money we need to complete the project, and things like that. It's not about abstract calculations. It's about forecasts. And for reporting, well, first of all, it's a weekly management activity. So you create the data for the reports every week. Now, in some projects, you may want to have a single report you send to everyone and you do it every week. That's fine. But sometimes you see that it may not be suitable to some people. So for example, there may be some executives that don't need to have any details about the project, or it's not interesting for them to receive reports every week. So you create a second type of report or a third type of report. Some of them can be done every week, for some of them every other week, and so on. And when you decide about it, if you remember, we have a list of stakeholders in our project description. You also add a small column in front of that in your project description mentioning the type of report they're supposed to receive. And then you also check to make sure that it's working well for them. After that, we usually have deviations. We've measured our progress. We usually have deviations, and that's absolutely fine. In this activity, we are supposed to plan responses to those deviations. How are we going to recover from them? Or maybe even we want to change our targets. That's also an option, but it will impact our justification probably, and it will have its own implications. But anyway, in here, if the deviations are too big, you're supposed to send that information to the sponsor and ask them to make a decision. But if it's not too big, then you, as the project manager, will make the decision with your team members together. In some cases, in many cases, actually, people can tell when something is super important, and that's okay. But sometimes you may run into problems with that, and in that case, you can just set thresholds with the sponsor and have exact amounts for it. That's fine, but only do that if you really need to. After that, we have another kickoff meeting. It's really short, really short, and we go through what we are going to do in the weekly cycle. In the monthly cycle, our kickoff was mainly focused on the achievements, on the outcomes, but here we are mainly focused on the activities. And the purpose for that is we do have a plan, and we've created the plan with the help of the team members. That's also important, in case I didn't mention it before. If the project manager alone creates a plan, that's not useful. The project manager is supposed to be a facilitator and bring those people together, those who are experts, to create the plan together. But anyway, we do have the plan, and they can go and check everything on the plan, but still, sometimes we forget about some of the practical dependencies. We go on and we run into difficulties. There some of the conflicts in different teams working on deliverables. This kickoff meeting is a really good last chance for us to find out about those things before they happen. So every team leader will talk about what they're going to do in the upcoming week. And if another team leader realizes, oh, no, we can't do that, we are doing something else there will be a conflict, they will solve it there, they will make a decision. And the last one, as usual, is a focused communication. The goal here is similar to the previous one, but we have both of them. Here we send a message to all the team members and tell them what's going to happen in the upcoming week. And there are two reasons. Sometimes people are distracted in the kickoff meetings. They may miss something. And sometimes you may have to have a smaller kickoff meetings without all the team members. Maybe you can only bring the team leaders there. In both cases, it helps if you have a focused communication to bring those things to the attention of all the people. And for all of these, it's extremely important to keep your focused communications really brief, really straightforward, and clear, because otherwise people learn to just ignore those messages. That was the weekly activities, and we have a few daily activities. One of them is to manage risks, issues, and change requests. So every day, as the project manager, you have to be looking for those things, and you should be talking to other people in the project to identify them. And when you do, you will add it to the follow-up register. And something that I didn't mention before is that every item in the follow-up register and every deliverable in the deliverables map needs to have a custodian. You assign someone as the custodian to that follow-up item or to that deliverable. And that person will be responsible for following up, for reporting on how it goes, checking to make sure that if there's a response, the response is happening, and so on. And here in this activity, you as a project manager will be in touch with those custodians, but not only that, you will also talk to other people. The other thing is you will accept completed deliverables. We really want to limit parallel work. There's this tendency in many projects to have too many deliverables develop at the same time. And when I say develop, it's not only about IT development, it's also about construction projects, process plant projects, research projects. So they go on with one deliverable, and as soon as it runs into a little bit of difficulty, they send half of the team to work on another similar deliverable. And it becomes too complicated. It becomes very risky in the future. So here, we expect the project manager to encourage everyone to focus on finishing the in-progress deliverables and deliver them to the project manager. We will check them a really rough approval, a rough check and a preliminary approval here. And encouraging everyone to focus and finish things before going on to the next one. It doesn't mean that it's a bad thing to have parallel work, but there's an optimum level. You have to find that optimum level, and that's almost always lower than what people think. So that was it about the daily activities. We go on throughout the month, and when we approach the end of the month, we have the monthly closure activities. The first one is to evaluate stakeholder satisfaction. And when we say stakeholders, it's both the internal stakeholders, team members, and the external stakeholders, the customer or the customer-like part of your company. You send surveys to all those people, and it's recommended for it to be anonymous, for people to feel more comfortable and tell you what they think. The idea is that we don't want the problems to pile up and cause a big issue. We want to solve things as soon as possible. In the next activity, we capture lessons and plan for improvements. As I mentioned before, the way we work with the follow-up register, the items, the risks or issues or so, when they are closed, they work as lessons learned. In here, we double check to make sure that we have everything captured. And also for those things that are closed, if something is really important as a lesson, as a learned lesson, we will mark it. We give it a star or something. And we also want to plan for improvements, especially based on what we've learned in E1. And you can do it with a small team, for example, the project manager plus team leaders. But It's also recommended to bring everyone and have a short workshop. Give them the results of the evaluation. Tell them this is how it goes. And for example, we seem to have these two problems or difficulties. What do you think we should do? And then you can use the Delphi technique. You can use the wisdom of the crowds and facilitate them to give you the solution, which can be really great because if you do it properly, the solution you can get from them can be very interesting. That's one aspect. And the other one is that because they are the people who have designed the solution, you will have their buy-in. The chances of it succeeding in the project will be higher. Also, you show your appreciation for those people when you ask them their opinion, and it has a good impact in the project. The last one, as usual, is focused communication. We send a message to everyone and tell them what we got from the project in the previous cycle. So that's a normal life of a project. We go 1 month at a time. We do all of those things. And then at the end, we have project closure. The first thing is to hand over the product. You double check to make sure that everything is okay, that every item in the follow-up register is closed, and then you officially hand it over to your customer. And when I say customer, it can also be a customer-like side of your organization for internal projects. Next, we have the last stakeholder satisfaction evaluation. The previous one really helps inside the project, but this is when we are done with the project. So we cannot use it for the project, but it's really important information for the future projects. That's why we do it. And then we have the last peer review. We will archive the project documents. And the archival is important because we want these documents to be available to the future projects. These are really important. We have the lessons learned here, or even other things like the deliverables map. That can also be helpful to similar projects you will have in the future. So make sure it's archived properly, people have access to it, and so on. Then we celebrate, and we have this special activity for it here to make sure we won't forget. And the last one, as usual, is to have a focused communication. You send a message to everyone in the company and let them know that the project is closed. And yeah, you tell them what you got out of the project. That's the main part within the borders of the project. And as I told you before, we also have the post-project management cycle. That is a cycle you would run for usually 1 to 5 years. And you will probably repeat it every 3 months or every 6 months. It all depends on the product of the project. And first, you evaluate the benefits of the project. And by the way, by default, this is the responsibility of the sponsor to run the post-project management cycle, not the project manager anymore, unless someone else in the portfolio management gets the responsibility. So the first thing is to evaluate the benefits. You check to see what happened to all the great ideas you had at the beginning of the project. And if there were some unexpected benefits, you also evaluate the disbenefits and unexpected disbenefits. You collect all that information. And in the second activity, you use that with the help of others to generate new ideas. And there are 2 types of new ideas here. One is that you see that you are generating benefits with the project, but there is 1 or 2 simple things, simple tasks, that if you do them, it will increase the benefits. So in that case, you will go and find resources for that. And the other one is that it's also a good source of information for coming up with ideas for new projects. So as you can guess, this is something that you have to do in a workshop with the help of other people. Also, there's this option if you need to combine all the post-project management cycles of all finished projects together in one workshop. But you have to make sure that all of them are covered. And the last activity is a focused communication. That's where we send a message to everyone and tell them about the benefits realized from the project. We still want them to have that type of understanding. It's, again, a reminder. You see, the project you did 2 years ago or 3 years ago, in the past 6 months, it has created this great thing for us. So, for example, there was this article in a very important magazine about our project. See how important that is for our reputation? And that was all thanks to you people who did the project. That's both appreciation and also the reminder of what we have to focus on. So that's the end. That's what P3express is. And for those of you who are interested, you can go to the website, P3.express. There you can find the manual, and the manual is available in 21 languages, I think. And all of that is done by the help of the contributors, which is great. As I told you before, it's not proprietary. It's like open source. It's not exactly open source because it's not software, but it belongs to the community, and the community really helps. So people have translated it to many languages, and more than half of the people who read the manual, who download the manual, do it in a language other than English, which is interesting. And by the way, you can also check the traffic information of the website for different languages and so on the website. Everything's available, very transparent. So that was the first one, the manual. The second resource that you can use, if you like, as a practitioner, is the e-learning course called the Artophile Center Project. It's an imaginary project called Artophile, and it's an interactive fiction. It's a story. You will play the role of one of the characters. It was a very successful course, actually. We've received a lot of great feedback from people who've taken the course. So maybe you can take a look. And for trainers, there are a few extra things. One is a series of Train the Trainer courses. It's ongoing, and right now we only have one, which is a Train the Trainer course for people who are already PRINCE2 trainers. In the future, we will have a similar course for people who are PMP trainers and Scrum trainers and PM2 trainers. So there will be 3 more courses in the future. And the second one is a guide for the instructor-led workshops, training workshops. So as the trainer, you can use this guide. It gives you ideas on how to run your workshop. And it's a really detailed guide. It goes through everything. Okay, so that was it. I hope it was helpful, and my timing is, I would say, very good, isn't it?
Perfect, perfect. We still have 10 minutes, so a couple of questions, maybe remarks. And anyway, I'd like to thank you, Nader, for your presentation. It was very clear and very good. It's great to see a global open project management system, and that has a lot of common sense built into it. And that's also what some people appreciate in this. Although there were some questions or remarks about the role of the sponsor versus the project manager. I mean, it was Bruce who mentioned, okay, there's not usual to have a sponsor who's the single point of contact and do a lot of stuff that project managers normally do. Of course, the project manager in the room likes that some of the roles or responsibility is shifted towards somebody else, maybe higher in the company with more responsibility or exposure. That could be good. But I mean, how does that really come from? Where does it come from in P3express that the sponsor is put into that critical role?
Oh, the division of responsibilities really depends on what we can expect from each person. We really want to promote the type of professional project managers that, for example, PMI has done a great job of promoting throughout the years. People who are focused on what project management is. They are not super technical experts. They are not someone else. They are focused on project management. Now, as a project manager, you are responsible for the day-to-day activities. You're responsible for facilitation, for resolving conflicts, and so on. There are certain things that we should not expect from project managers, but unfortunately we do, at least according to me. And for example, some of the agile practitioners had a great role in creating that idea that the project manager is the person who has to take care of everything, or many of them don't believe in project managers, so they say the project team members. They have to make sure that, for example, the benefits are there and the project is justifiable. These things are very far away from what we have in the projects. We cannot do it properly in the project. And if we force people to take responsibility for that, they won't be able to do that properly, and it also harms what they are good at doing. And for the project manager, the type of things that we give to the sponsor are normally the things that are really related to the organizational structure, to the policies in the organization, to the politics, sometimes even to the source of power. And in some companies, the project managers are actually executives, not executives, at least high-level managers in the company. They already know what those things are. But on the other hand, they are not the type of professional project manager we're looking for. The type of professional project manager is a little bit further away from those things. So if we expect them to deal with those, it will be difficult for them. It won't be efficient, and it will be too much cognitive load for them. And on the other hand, we already have this role of a sponsor, and the sponsor is supposed to be a high-level manager, an executive. And for example, in P3express, we say that the sponsor has to be one of the portfolio team members or a proxy to that person. So that person is already involved with all of those things. It's comfortable for them to do that. So that's why we give the sponsor instead of the project manager.
Okay, great. Also, a couple of questions about Agile and P3express.
Okay. You can call it a post-war project management system, P3express. So the agile waterfall wars, we can imagine that it's over. It's almost over, I would say. We are calmer a little bit. We don't have that really extreme level of excitement, and we don't have to divide the worlds and human beings into two parts, agile and non-agile, friend and foe, and so on.
There are people combining P3express and Scrum, for instance.
I will get back to that. But before that, let me tell you this, that P3express recognizes both of them, both the adaptive, you can also call it agile, and predictive methods. And the right choice depends on the type of product. None of them is the general right choice. People have to decide based on the type of product they are creating. And it was really, really carefully designed, P3express, to be compatible with both of those delivery methods. And let me go back a little bit here, more than a little, even more. Okay, here. The choice of delivery method, agile or predictive, that has a lot to do with the technical layer. So for something that is in the technical layer, it would have a great impact. For the project management layer, it still has an impact, but it's never as great as the level of impact in the second layer. So it's easier for something that is created here to be compatible with both of them. We've had these things in the past. For example, the PMBOK guide. And by the way, I should have said it at the beginning. Maybe I forgot. Everything that I tell about PRINCE2 or the PMBOK guide is my personal opinion, not any official opinion, because I was part of the team in some of these things. So in my opinion, the PMBOK guide was always leaning toward predictive methods in the past. It was created by people who were really familiar with predictive projects. And gradually, because Agile got more famous, they bolted into a few ideas related to Agile, but it was never really part of it. In version 7, it's different. In version 7, we started from scratch, and what is created is really compatible with both of them. P3express is also like that. It's relatively new. It's 5 or 6 years old, and it had the opportunity to see everything and create a system that is really compatible with both of them. And look, you asked me something about the Scrum. Here, Scrum, as you see, has a little bit here in the project management layer. So if you want to combine it with anything, it doesn't matter what you pick here, there will be an overlap, and that overlap has a lot of risk for conflicts. So combining a Scrum with anything else would be difficult. But for those people who are used to using a Scrum, they can easily switch from a Scrum into Kanban development, or into XP maybe. Although the level of discipline XP is a lot more than a Scrum, but anyway, if that's fine, they can switch to one of these two that doesn't have anything in this layer, and then they can easily combine it with P3express or something else. Mm-hmm. There is also Micro P3express is still in draft. It's not finalized, but there are already a few teams who have switched from Scrum into Micro P3express. Mm-hmm. That may be better than trying to combine these things with P3express, because P3express is not for micro projects. Mm-hmm. And people who are using a Scrum, if it's really a Scrum and not a scaled version like these things, then they have micro projects, and P3express is not really for that. Micro P3express is for that.
Okay, that's clear. That's clear. Any other questions from the audience? Time's almost up, so yeah. Some people like Angel who have mixed project methods and say that works. It's possible to use it with P3express, so that's good to hear. A lot of people thanking you for the great presentation, the great overview. It's definitely good, and there's of course a lot of information on P3.express, the website, like the manual and all the information that is out there in the open. So no, I'd like to thank you, Nader, for the presentation, and wish you success in developing this and making this popular. And of course, thank you very much for answering all of these questions, giving this great overview. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for organizing, and thanks to everyone for coming. It was a pleasure talking to you. I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, it was. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.